Felton, I like how you got that health banner in the background there.
Well, it's only right. Mel
Yeah, man.
Christie
Yeah,
Turner would beat me across the head if we didn't have any.
right.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's all about the brand, bruh.
Well, just a little bit, bro. Just a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
Hopefully we can get these two other scholars to come and enjoy
Mm-hmm.
the village of health at some point in time. We were
Oh
really
yeah.
before COVID because we were going to be up there at Virginia Union. So I'm
Okay.
certain we would
Yeah,
have
Oh, that would have been nice.
powered.
yeah, we were anticipating that.
So we will at some point in time get together. Um,
Absolutely.
Has health been the Shaw?
we have not been to Shaw. We've not been in. Well, we've been in North.
Wow.
We have been at Livingstone and Johnson C. Smith.
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
Well, you must come to Shaw,
well,
Mr. President. You got to come to Raleigh.
Raleigh, Raleigh Wood, as Tassany DeBroy calls it,
Hollywood.
calls it Raleigh Wood.
Raleigh Wood.
It is the 3 o'clock hour, and I'm really excited. Want to welcome everyone to the Forethoughts of Our Founders, the podcast for the Higher Education Leadership Foundation. My name is Herman Felton. I'm one of the founders, and my current place of employment is at Wiley College, first west of the Mississippi, the home of the great debaters. I'm very fortunate to serve as the 17th president there, and am also blessed to be able to do this work, advocacy for our HBCUs. I'm joined in this work by Alfred Anthony Pinkard, president of Wilberforce University, Dr. Melva Christie Turner Williams, who is the vice chancellor of Southern Shreveport and also interim of Southern New Orleans. Greg Dees, who is the extraordinarily talented young brother who is here at Wiley, graduate of Livingstone College, Northeastern University, some strong MBA work. We're the agents of or the sacred keepers of the trust. And we started a podcast to really talk about and chronicle how we at HBCUs were dealing with COVID-19. And obviously, we've reached a liminal moment. Some would say a tipping point as it relates to COVID, the insidious disease it is, and another one that we're dealing with, which is racism. There's truly been an awakening and a tipping point. And today we are excited to kick off our second part of our webisode with some scholars who happen to be administrators, but first and foremost are men of the cloth. First, I'd like to welcome Dr. Lester McCorn. He's president of Clinton College. He's an alumnus of Morehouse College, Yale Divinity School, and Chicago Theological Seminary. And is currently, if he has not, learned what it means to be in a classroom for one doctorate, has found himself on a circuitous road to another at United Theological. McCorn is an author standing on holy common ground, and he came by way of Clinton College from the historic Pennsylvania Avenue, where he was senior pastor and is a member of the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Connectional Church in Baltimore, Maryland. Dr. Johnny Hill is the dean of the Divinity School. He's a leader in religious studies and served as the department chair and associate professor of philosophy and religion at Claflin University in Orangeburg, South Carolina, before being appointed as dean of the Divinity School. He too is an author. The author of A Prophetic Rage, a post-colonial theology of liberation and the first black president, Barack Obama, race, politics, and the American dream. This brother is also a Morehouse man. They seem to be everywhere. Proud veteran, masters of degrees from Duke University, and a PhD from of theology at Garrett Seminary. And our last guest is a person who has a heart of servitude, found himself as a trustee at Virginia Union University, and a void became a void was opened up at none other than Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology at Virginia Union University. He stepped down as a board member to serve. Attended Bluefield College, is a proud graduate of STVU, what they call the School of Theology at Virginia Union, and holds a terminal degree from the Aquinas Institute of Theology. He's also the senior pastor of Union Branch Baptist Church in Chesterfield, Virginia. I am acutely aware of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School because of my pastor, Dr. Reverend Rudolph Waldo McKissick, Jr. and Senior, for that matter, down at
Mhm.
Baptist. Knew of Samuel DeWitt Proctor before I knew what it was, knew what it meant. We're really happy to have you all here today. Really excited, and want to thank you all for being here today.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It is our pleasure. Proving our value, the impact of Christian higher education and the responsibilities of a Christian leader. That's a mouthful. I think where we're at this day and age, I think really leaves all of us wanting civility and to really move about with a posture from which we have studied the basic tenets of human decency, right? We want our Americas to get back to that space. How can we, as Christian leaders, and this is the first question that I'd like to throw out to you all, and I'll start with the elder statesman, McCorn. He's got all of y'all by maybe a year or two. So, how, how can we produce the next wave of Christian leaders in the joint spaces of harmony and contention? How do we do that?
Well, first of all, you need elder statesmen in order to do it. Uh, I never thought I would be called an elder statesman.
Sorry.
But you can't do it without conflict, right? Conflict and tension is the stuff that makes leaders. And you don't need a leader if everything is going peaceful and harmonious. You need leaders to step into that space and willing to take the risk, be vulnerable, and all of that. So how we do that, I think, is being authentic. And we don't have far to go. All of us represent the Black church. Each one of our institutions was founded, supported, grounded in the Black church tradition, which is a prophetic tradition. And the prophetic tradition, by its nature, calls for leadership. It mandates leadership. So there's an old saying that some were taught and others just caught it. I think on a Black college campus, both happens. There is an intentionality about mentorship and, I dare say, discipleship that happens on campuses that shapes character. There's an ethos that it's contagious. So that even if you're not, for instance, if you're not a major in religion or philosophy, you're still gonna get it on a Black college campus. It's in the atmosphere, right? So you're going to get an understanding of it. You're going to get a historic understanding, but more importantly, you're going to get a contemporary application of what our tradition, our legacy has to say about what's going on right now. That's sort of my initial thoughts about that. I'll stop there, but I think that's how leadership begins on our campuses.
Thank you. Dr. Howard.
Yes, I believe that we have this unique enterprise as those of us who serve in higher ed, in particular in these spaces that we call historical Black colleges and universities, in that we're privileged to partner with both theory and praxis. And in doing so, we are birthing a generation, or at least playing a role in helping of leaderships led by a Christian ethos, some type of moral conviction that seeks to advance humanity, um, as opposed to just being technical to that of the assigned text or book or theory that suggests we are made to, as Lester alluded to, be enthralled by the spirit of the community and the institution that seeks to model itself even as this beloved community, that we seek to practice what we teach and preach. I believe that such intentional modeling of higher ed is in fact that incubator that, as you mentioned, the next generation emerges from. I believe that space as well must be provided uh, for diverse makeup and faces of the present generations. We're about position at a place that we dare assume or assert that God has fully expressed all that which God has intended or God wills in our day, but in this day and the days to come by way and through of young men and women alike. So I just believe that there's intentionality, but intentionality is innate in it seems, and we attend to the health and the well-being of our sisters and our brothers. We are made to endure the weight of the academic rigor, but that rigor is intended to model before us as well, or show us pathways in order for us to partner with one another in order to improve humanity as a whole of the global society. And being Christian institutions or institutions that are founded in, grounded in, still I trust being led by the Spirit of Christ. We are somewhere between in leadership theory, style, and practice that of servanthood and stewardship. We take into account all of that which God has entrusted us, even the 4, 5, 6, or 7 years that it might take some of us to matriculate through undergrad, and whoever knows how long for graduate and postgraduate. These moments in this time as time and a treasure that God has entrusted unto us to attend to cultivate, make the best of, and
Mhm.
I believe that that embodies who we dare say we ambitions of birth. I pause.
Thank you, sir. Dean Hill.
Thank you so much for that question. I really think that that is really the pivotal question for our time. How do we produce a new generation of freedom fighters, of courageous visionary leaders? It's going to go out and change the world, given the pressing issues that we face right now. I mean, I think that this is the real critical question of our time. And how do we do it? I mean, I think first we have to take a radical approach of embracing our history. For too long, I think we've diminished and sort of suppressed the radicality of our history, especially around the freedom struggle and resistance to the slave past, Reconstruction up through history and the fight against Jim Crow segregation. And so in many respects, we have to go back and reclaim the power of our history that's rooted in faith, that's rooted in resistance to systemic evil, rooted in resistance to the forces of nihilism, because even beyond the material forces of systemic racism, the problem of nihilism and hopelessness and despair has always been this deep perennial threat to Black life and even to Western society in general. But what Black folks have showed us in the past is that through our faith, through the pursuit of knowledge and understanding of God and the world, that they were able to resist the forces of nihilism and therefore resist the power of systemic racism and systemic evil that was crushing against their lives throughout history. So I think we have to do a better job of reclaiming our history. In a
Yes.
lot of our HBCUs, there's usually only about one requirement to study African American history. It's
Person.
usually a very, just random sort of defunct class. But I think
Mhm.
we have to take a radical approach. In the HBCUs I've had the privilege of serving, most of these institutions have about a 90-95% African American population. And so it seems to me that we have to do a much better job that when the students walk onto these campuses, there is beyond a shadow of a doubt a radical celebration of African American history through the symbols and the visionary institutions that we serve, and also what they see and feel in the classroom
Yeah.
is absolutely critical. I think the other step in forming visionary leaders and a new generation of prophetic, courageous, moral leaders means giving them the experiential approach that Dean Howard was speaking of as well. Somehow we have to combine the rigors of critical reflection, theory, and also praxis, so that students get that hands-on experience that they need in order to connect the dots through their experiences.
How?
And then, yes,
No,
sir.
go ahead. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
And we understand, President Felton, that part of the challenge is navigating our accreditation standards and how that is constructed. But I think it's very important that we move forward in giving students that global experience, hands-on experiences that are so much a part of our history and our culture and heritage as well. And so getting students out of the classroom and into those experiential learning environments where they can connect the theory with all of their being, their bodies, their thoughts, feelings, their movements, and all of those sorts of things as well.
I just find it serendipitous that we now have the progeny of slaves in
Mm,
what is an ideal space: education and Christianity, religion,
mm,
and we're able to do those unabashedly, unapologetically, and in many terms in our own way, on our own terms.
mm, mm,
I find that when we talk about these young leaders, this next wave, are we doing a good enough job of taking into consideration when we talk about making sure that we return back to our history, which is something that I fervently believe we are not doing a great job of. When I say we, us four gentlemen, our brothers and sisters, not the generation before us, but I think we have an onus to make sure that that transfer that we have is poured into those vessels that are following us. How do we make sure that rigor meets the standard to which they are living upon? In other words, we have young kids now who want to do it their way. And oftentimes, when they run up against the wall, the system, it is met cloaked in the old way. How do we ensure that we don't turn off this next generation and allow them to be their brilliant selves while understanding the duty that they have, and that you can't just watch YouTube of Howard tearing up a sermon, or Hill, or McCorn, and emulate what you see there without understanding social justice, what social justice really means, the radicalism of Christ. How do we make sure that we have the space that is ripe for the next wave to be their authentic self, while also appreciating where they came from?
Well, I'll take a
Guys,
stab at it. I think you have to replicate the village. I mean, if there's one concept that describes who we are, the mutuality of our network, the accountability of our network, it's the term village,
Mhm.
where no subset gets to operate independent of that. There's no silo, whether it's generational or gender or whatever political stripe you are. For Africans, the village is what guides us. It sets parameters. It reels us back in when we get out there too far. It corrects us. It challenges us. It convicts us. And I think, perfect example, a modern example is we just celebrated the homegoing of John Lewis. And John Lewis, I think, is a perfect example of what we want to do with all of our institutions. A young man who went to Fisk and American Baptist and who wasn't the brightest and the most articulate, but he understood what it meant to be a responsible agent of change.
Mm-hmm.
And he learned that. I mean, obviously, his black church, from whence he came, began to develop that, planted those seeds, but it was developed at these institutions. And as he watched Dr. King, he was doing, both my colleagues talked about praxis, right? Praxis is action and reflection, right? Action and reflection.
Mm.
And matched with a John Lewis is a James Lawson, right? you know, Lawson was not a whole lot older than John Lewis, but he was enough older that he had grounding, he had a wisdom about him, he had a commitment to scholarship and education that he passed on to John Lewis and others.
Mhm.
I think that when we are operating on all cylinders,
Mhm.
that's what we are. We're producing the Lawsons and the John Lewises,
Yeah.
right? Both
Absolutely.
together. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I just echo those words? I mean, it's funny you should mention John Lewis because there's a story about how he preached to the chickens even when no one else would hear him,
Yeah,
right?
that's
That
right.
he had such a utter determination to proclaim justice and freedom that even when he had nothing, he still recognized his value. So back to our overarching theme of proving your value, what I think HBCUs do very well, and even liberal arts colleges that are rooted in faith,
Yeah.
is that they affirm the humanity.
Come
I
on now.
mean, to affirm the humanity of these young men and women who the world has told them they are nothing in many respects, especially in a racialized society. So when I hear the words of John Lewis and I think about Ella Baker and even now Kamala Harris and what she is doing as a Howard graduate today is quite extraordinary. To speak to the way in which HBCUs, liberal arts colleges rooted in faith, do more than just educate the minds. They also educate the hearts
Yeah.
as well. And
Yeah.
I think that's very powerful and very rich and very incredibly important in a time when we're seeing the resurgence of racism and white supremacy like never before in modern history.
Yeah.
Yeah, and President Felton, I believe that your opening statement speaks to a necessary response in that we might very well be guilty as a generation
Mm-hmm.
of failing to pass down the treasures that were entrusted unto us. I believe that we have to continue to not just simply have a pass down the tradition or pass down the stories and the histories and the herstories and the stories of our mothers and our fathers that have shaped us as a community and kept us as well.
Mm-hmm.
And those stories, of course, are undergirded in faith, but we have to dare to entertain as well. Again, we speak of theory and practice. We have to entertain the realities, truly entertain the reality of women and men today, meaning that as illustrative as we possibly can, not just in the pulpit, but also behind the lectern,
Mm-hmm.
and shaping or cultivating these lives that are now serving as leaders and change agents.
Yeah.
That we have to take into account how does that treasure in earthen vessels yesterday or jars of clay yesterday
Mhm.
present themselves today,
Yes, sir.
and in the meeting of them in their own lived experience, I believe that there's a more attentive ear, and I say that as well because Johnny alluded to earlier, of course, how it is in many HBCUs. We have a class or two in African American history,
Mhm.
And it's almost as if at times it's an afterthought, right? But that class is intended as well to affirm the humanity of the present day and present age, as well as celebrate our ancestors, right? So, and this is not a plug, but there's one course that I taught for years at Virginia Union in
Should be
undergrad.
a plug, Doc. It should be.
Um, okay, then, well, here comes the plug. Uh, you know, this class was taught by my pastor, Angelo Chapman, for a number of years. And then in 2008, I started to teach this course. And of my students, sometimes I had 3 or 4 sections of this particular class that I'll share momentarily. And I literally had one or no religious studies majors at all in the class of some 30 to 40 students. And that class was Black religion. Now, Black religion, as it is still currently instituted or constructed at Virginia Union, its objective, I should say, is to share the story and tell the story of not only African American history um, or or Black history,
Mhm.
but share and tell it through the lens of faith.
Mm.
How Harriet Tubman and Gabriel Prosser, they served and they were identified and recognized as the Moseses of their day. But in the same manner, the connectivity to the history, to that of our present day, acknowledges that our current leaders of Black Lives Matter movement and other emerging forces and individuals serve likewise as the Moseses of today. So it's not just simply being reflective and reminiscent of of those times and those ages and those persons and personalities that we celebrate from yesteryear, daring to have the present age to understand that you are within that narrative and that story as well.
Yes.
So I just believe we need to continue to do our best and make an even greater effort, as you alluded to earlier, Brother Felton, of telling the story, but making sure that all parties are included in that story, or we're not forsaking the story that is also being lived and shared, and we are even gleaning from and being strengthened by our
Absolutely.
current age and generation, and therefore it creates a deeper appreciation for the institution that truly takes their experience into account.
Are you all optimistic about what's coming behind us, the leadership, those now and those who are behind them? Are you all optimistic about those torch bearers who will be carrying the torches? Are you all? I am. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I am. I am. I'm excited about what's emerging. I think we still are struggling with trying to get our head around exactly what it means,
Mhm.
because, for instance, this Black Lives Matter movement has been an extraordinary, I think, bursting open of what activism looks like in this present context. So, for instance, this past summer and in the late spring, we saw protests in almost every state in the country.
Mhm.
And that kind of coordinated, systematic, prophetic, righteous indignation has never been seen before. Even during the civil rights movement, there was not that level and vast coordinated effort that spread out even around the world. And so, on the one hand, I'm very excited. I think we're seeing things happening with this generation that we've never seen before in terms of startups and individuals creating their own businesses. I mean, the path that Robert Smith has started with his business becoming such a multi-billionaire and laying the groundwork for other Black entrepreneurs and also activists is extraordinary. But on the other hand, I'm concerned that there's a lack of sort of engagement with history with this generation. There seems to be a lack of a critical engagement with the heritage that has brought us this far. So I think that this generation needs both
Let,
the innovation, the creativity, the newness, the embrace of technology, but also we have to go back and fetch our history as well and make sure that we bring that with us.
Is that a byproduct of the next wave not wanting to deal with the old heads? Right? Like many of us have been in spaces where it was time for leadership for us and we felt resistance. And rather than to try to navigate that resistance, we just did it on our own. Is there this feeling that there is synergy with the old heads and the Black Lives? Because as you pointed, Hill, it is extraordinary to watch what Black Lives Matter really came was born out of and what it has evolved into now. And that has been done largely by some young folk who may or may not have had technical training or theoretical training in the space of social justice. Is there enough synergy? Is there a need for synergy? Obviously, they've made some great movement, but again, we're talking about this next wave and harmony and contention and creating that good groove between the two. Is there enough work between the two bodies?
Brother
But
Felton,
Uh,
if you don't mind, I would like to just share. Are you asking of that of Hill?
No, 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 no. It's
Okay.
just it's out there.
I would say that um, that's a penetrating question because
mhm.
context matters. We see synergy in certain communities and contexts, and as Hill alluded to, we celebrate it almost like this Pentecostal movement that is taking place in the name of liberation. We see persons of all different shades and hues and ages and social economic status coming together in the name of justice, right? And that's a tremendous model for this 21st century to see how collectively we can create change for the
And
good
and
uh,
not offensive.
and not offensive. Absolutely. However, we do realize in certain communities there's still a major gap or chasm between generations when it comes down to not only leadership theories and practices and styles, but even the execution of what the hope is, and that is to create equity or a level playing field for all of God's creation to walk victoriously in and toward. All right. However, back to that first question, I wed it with this question as well because I'm optimistic, without a doubt, of what I see. But yet, there's reservation in hope when it comes down to, in particular, um, the reconstruction. See, I'm optimistic that this current age will do a tremendous work as it is being done in the deconstructing of colonized thought,
Yeah.
behavior, right? Institutions that are still harbors or pillars of institutional racism and
Hmm.
oppression of every kind. Long to hear more so is what shall we reconstruct or what shall we build
Mhm.
this time that perhaps the generation of our mothers and our fathers, um, I don't want to say failed, but were not made to take into account was needed not just for that age and that generation, but the generations to come. Simply put, I believe that it's one thing for us to say that we're going to dismantle again these current constraints and bondages that have been oppressing all people, but certainly African Americans. But you need history in order to ensure that it does not repeat itself, and not just the bad history, but
Good.
the history that was intended to be good.
Right. That's right.
I.e., Bork and Sander talks about, in his work, how in many ways we realize that many of our mothers and our fathers, in the name of affirmative action, in the name of integration, sacrificed Black businesses, Black wealth, Black communities. So I believe we need to keep teaching our history so that is understood. Even the steps that were made then with the hope of being good, but did not necessarily bring forth a return that they anticipated. is not repeated likewise.
Yeah.
So I'm optimistic that we will see, in many ways, the deconstruction necessary, or the dismantling of these strongholds and these pillars that's been robbing us of our creative genius and our God-given freedoms. But I would like to see and hear more. What shall this pathway toward a better look
Lead.
like?
Yeah.
Yeah, and lead to.
Yeah, that's on point.
Mm.
You want to add something, Lester?
Well, I would just say that, this is why it is important for the faith community to remain engaged in this movement, because we bring a set of principles and a an organic wisdom that is needed in this moment. You can't build an Antioch or an Athens or Rome without bringing Jerusalem,
Hmm.
right? There's there's a history, there's a culture, there's an ethos, there's a commitment to holding that story. I mean, if we just use
Mm.
Jews for an example, right? No self-respecting Jew would ever disavow his or her history, right? You can't be a Jew without understanding and celebrating your history. And I think as African Americans, we suffer from a little bit of amnesia. And part of that,
Mm.
I think you were kind of getting at it, Herman, that, part of it is that there's been an attempt to kind of break away, almost to disavow our past in order to build a new future. But I don't think you can do that well, because
Mm-mm.
it lacks grounding. It's like a house
Mm-hmm.
built on sand. As the
Mm.
Bible says, when the wind comes and the rain comes and the storms come, that house is going to collapse.
Yeah.
And so we have to
Mm-hmm.
hold on to that foundation. The other thing I'll say about this real quickly is that I think technology has presented another set of challenges to us. And every generation, maybe several generations, has had its own external forces that have kind of shaped it and
Mm.
pulled it.
Hmm.
But technology has been unlike anything else. It is so forceful, it is so rapid that it has forced us to create, unfortunately, this is probably a bad metaphor, but artificial intelligence,
Yeah.
right? I think we got people on the ground who have artificial intelligence, because it's all about theory and ideas without having it grounded in lived experiences that cross generations. And I think it is up to us. I mean, we represent probably the two main repositories of our history and our culture is the Black church and the Black college,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
We carry that burden with us,
Yeah.
and it is
Mm.
our responsibility to inculcate that into the next generation.
I want to
Mm-hmm.
move to my next question, which is how do we manage the socio political discourse and the toxicity that follows? But I first want to ask one really quick question, or rather two: Was Jesus radical? Right, that's
Oh man.
rhetorical. And
We
Yes.
can dispense with that question. We can
right,
dispense with that one.
right, and I should have prefaced it by saying two rhetorical questions. The other, was he a servant? Right. And the reason I'm asking those questions before I ask again the socio how do we teach this group to manage the socio-political discourse and the toxicity that follows it is because I believe inherent in that you have to have people who are servants, and have the right mixture of radicalism to respond to that groove. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk first about service. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Leadership. Obviously, every leader does not understand what it means to be a servant leader. And
Mm.
how important is that for us to inculcate into the spirit of these Christian leaders this simple notion that if you don't know anything about serving, you have no business leading? How do we make
Absolutely.
that is a very clear message?
I think that's it, Doc. I mean, I think that that is absolutely essential. At Shaw, We were founded on the principle of pro Christo et humanitate, for
Mm.
Christ and humanity. And if you trace the history of most of our HBCUs across the nation, they had some element of service at its core. And I think that if we're going to really help this generation navigate this new terrain of technology and globalization, instilling in them that deep, profound sense of service, of giving back, of uplifting humanity is going to absolutely be critical. But the challenge is that this generation is also very suspicious of the church. So I'm not suggesting that they're not interested in faith or spiritual, but the data shows that many in this generation are very suspicious of the institutional church. So the question that many of us faith leaders have to grapple with is, how do we help develop faithful servant leaders, perhaps even beyond the institutional church, so that students understand that they don't have to be limited to the institutional church. Yes, this is a space where you can serve. Yes, this is a place where you can become a pastor or a missionary or a administrator, but you don't have to limit your gaze to just the institutional church to be a servant leader for Christ, to be a servant leader of faith. You can also serve in many, many different capacities in the public square or in business or in science or other disciplines as well. And that's a challenge, but I think that's something we're going to have to struggle with, is helping students understand their faith beyond just the institutional church.
Mhm.
I really appreciate this conversation, Herman. It's challenging. It reminds us, each of us, I trust, of the work and the labor that we have been called
Yes, sir.
to carry out, and it needs to be a constant reminder. Um, I believe I share a similar thought and patterns of thought of Hill. And to elaborate, I would dare say that the Black church and the Black um, Academy, HBCU, as Lester mentioned as well, are these repositories. Um, Gavard Wilmore said that the Black church was the first public freedom movement. Well, in the same manner, its twin is the HBCU. And we still have to continue to not only harbor and certainly not hoard these treasures, but we need to share them so that light is continuing to
Mm,
shine in dark places. Malcolm, John Malcolm Ellison, former president of Virginia Union, I believe in the early 50s, stated or penned in publication that we are God's children and co-workers with God in bringing the blind to see, the lame to walk, and in setting at liberty those in bondage, whatever that nature of that bondage is.
Be free.
That is a servant.
Mm.
A servant is one who, again, serves first or leads by way of such example.
Mm.
Jesus, with that rhetorical question, was a servant with a liberative mind and hope, prophetic in his posture and in his total being. And that is the challenge in this 21st century, because Jesus has been taken hostage by not just white evangelical churches, but black churches as well, because such work that is liberating in the name of service and serving can also get you killed. And
mm,
we seek to embody the Christ that we know that is high and lifted, that name that is above every name. But before he got that name, he was crucified, seeking of Rome.
mm,
So there's a need for a recalibration of theology as well,
mm,
that we dare say is the undergirding of these institutions that we lead and serve.
mm,
Fundamentally, there's the theology of the cross and there's the theology of glory. And
mm,
we have a present age that leads more towards theology of glory and triumphalism that only finds strength um, or
mm,
identifies strength in what is looked upon as being. But the theology of the cross calls us to calls what is, and
Mhm.
even can discover and see how in the trenches of despair, there's strength when community connects hand in hand and is able to endure and maintain one's existence while going through. So we explore all of these leadership approaches and styles. We explore all of these organizational models of structuring, um, but some of these very same institutions need to seemingly check out at least Christology
Mm.
and say, if we are in fact an institution that was grounded in faith, and in particular the faith of Christ,
Mhm.
what would Jesus do?
Yes.
And if we're that committed to it, are we willing to at least sustain and aim of the service that we seek to carry out in order to help somebody along the way? Again, as John Ellison said, whatever nature of that bondage is, we've still been called to set those folk at liberty or to lead them to greener pastures.
So there needs
Mm.
to be an education of what it means to be a servant.
Mm.
Yes.
Mm.
Not even let's put aside theology, Christianity,
Mm.
Yeah.
leadership, etc. At the very foundation of that person espousing to lead, there needs to be a pristine understanding of what it means to be a servant. And I
Mm.
really like what you said, Greg, about it. Leadership excuse me as I digress here for a second and devolve, but leadership, as I say, is some tricky shit. It is tricky, and
Mm.
I say that because on one hand, it could be about compassion, and the other hand,
Mm.
be about the commitment to giving your life. Um,
That's right.
that's a huge that
Mm.
dichotomy is something that I don't think we understand, and it was
Mm.
exercised by so many in the Christian space and the social justice space that they understood that I saw something wrong. I ran to it and I'm going to do something about it. And whatever, as Esther would say, if I shall perish, then so be it.
Mm.
Right.
Mm.
Um, I think that service piece is really critically important because of radicalism and dealing with the socio-political stuff and how you manage that response is really what
Mm.
I want to make sure that our young leaders understand that
Mm.
when you're cloaked in a little bit of radicalism and you have that foundation of servanthood,
Mm.
your response is different to things, right? I think the way you
Absolutely. I'm curious, Dr. Felton and Dr. McCorn, in terms of like how our institutions are structured, where historically the students pretty much did everything. They worked in the kitchens, they handled the buildings and grounds, they pretty much took care of all facets of the institution, sort of in a mentorship space. But now we have contractors to pretty much kind of take care of most things at our universities. How has that sort of shaped how we form servant leaders? I'm just curious as to how you think about that. I mean, it seems to me that students walk into the university context, feeling like they should be served rather than coming in with the understanding that they're here to learn how to serve.
Yeah.
Greg is over there laughing. And you know the answer to that too, Hill. You know the answer.
Yeah. There are a couple of ways to skin that cat. One is you got liability issues now. I mean, we just live
Oh
in a
yeah.
prestigious society where everything is kind of challenged. So that's just kind of technical, but it's real. We actually, Johnny, it's interesting you asked that question because we are evolving as an institution to becoming what's known as a work college. And I don't
Mm.
know if you all familiar with that concept. There's only one nationally recognized HBCU that's a work college, and that's Paul Quinn in Dallas.
Oh
And
wow.
our
Yeah.
friend Michael Sorrell took that leap years ago. and moving the college into that direction. Probably the most famous model is Berea College in Kentucky, which many of y'all know about. Berea basically started that thing 100 years ago, where students work the farm of the agrarian campus to pay their.
Mm.
So for years, students at Berea have not paid tuition or very little tuition. Um, and so the model has evolved now to include on campus and off campus internships and externships, because the nature of the economy has changed, and students now, rightfully so, are asking, what can I get for my 4-year education? Can I get a job? Right? So what we're doing is teaching them skills on campus. So we're actually shifting to that. We've hired someone who is a workforce development specialist who's helping us to do that. So we will have some quote unquote menial jobs. I think you're kind of alluding to that, where you get a little sweat equity. You learn some stuff, because we really have a generation of students, many of whom have never worked a job before they came to college, right? Some of it is because of the privileged class that we've created, but another is because jobs have dried up in many places. Kids just can't get a job, so they come to college without the skills that you learn to show up at a job on time, to be disciplined, to follow a routine, to follow a supervisor, all those things that are important for you in the real world. So Clinton, now I would not propose this for everyone, but I'm just looking at the character of Clinton, the demographic that we serve. A work college makes sense for us, right? We're not going to be a research university. We're not going to be a top tier STEM college, although I hope one day we will. But you got to start, Booker T. Washington, cash your buckets down where you are.
Sorry.
And so
Right.
I think that it's wise for us to merge Booker T with WB,
Yeah.
Mm.
and that's what I'm attempting to do at Clinton College.
I
Wow.
think
Well said.
Hill, we have to recognize that we have a different type of student, right? And there's going
Mm.
to be a cadre of those who are no stranger to manual labor. And then there'll be a cadre of those who have intellectual properties that they want to use, and that is it. That's all they want to use. Um, and you have to respect that. I think the way we manage that really, and the way each individual institution does, is largely predicated on the person who's leading the place.
Mm.
It wasn't until a person was accused of something did I really understand who Samuel DeWitt Proctor was. I knew
Mm.
um, he is everything for me. He is the quintessential president for me.
Mm.
He, like many, Dr. Joseph Charles Price, who was the president at Livingstone College, a founder at Livingstone College. You you could go on and on. Daniel Payne. You could go on and on about these presidents who were president in title, but they were cooks, they were doctors, they were sociologists, they were, basketball players. They did everything on the campus, right? And there are some who now sit in the space of the presidency who believe that their job is myopic. I believe in looking
Mm.
at those who got so much, and we are still talking about this day, long
Mm.
as they've transitioned to glory.
Mm.
Those are the people who I think did it right. I'm not suggesting anyone
Mm.
else didn't do it right, but when I think about the quintessential leader for higher education, not just a black college, but higher education, this dude was a scholar. He was a quasi politician. He was a religious scholar. He was an administrator. Like he did it all, and there was no avenue that he was not phenomenal in. Now, I don't suppose that I will ever be able to be phenomenal in four prongs that he was. Hopefully, one of them, if I'm lucky, right? But to have done it on the level that he did in four different areas, I just think, and social justice was just amazing, the work that he did and the stuff that he's behind and people don't know. the answer to your question
Mm,
is really predicated on a couple of different things: the type of students that we have, and us recognizing
mm,
that some of them will and some of them won't. And then the mens rea of the president or the chancellor, he or she might have to really understand what's going to work at their space. So I think that's my humble response. I want to ask, what skill set should this leader that we are creating, what skill set or tools should they have in their toolbox to deal with the socio-political discourse and the toxicity as a young clergy member, right? You find yourself right smack dab in the middle of Chesterfield, Virginia, and it's your
mm,
first church, right out of seminary, and COVID happens, and then the insidious, even more insidious behavior of racism on a national level happens. How do we take the passion that is in a person and keep it unbridled, right? But allow it to be in a space where service can come out of that service for, the movement, service for the church, service for that individual. What toolbox skill tools should be in that toolbox of that young leader?
I dare say that you demonstrate or you illustrated the model that we obviously lift up here in Richmond, and that of Sam Proctor.
Mhm.
And he was a genius, certainly an intellectual giant, yet would not be found guilty of being perceived or looked upon as an elitist,
That's right.
because he rolled up his sleeves and engaged all creation. Um, I dare say that for one who serves in the academy and serves the local church, that as much as I am convinced that each of us must be very sure of our constitution, our person, constitution, and convictions must be solid and sound and foundational in who we are before we dare do what we do. We also cannot be um, found guilty, I should say, of any form of intellectual absolutism.
Mm.
And when I say that, I mean suggesting that we already know all we need to know,
Yes, sir.
mm,
because these two pandemics have disclosed a lot about me, um, and certainly a lot about the communities that I serve, that I'm privileged to serve, that I'm now also being made to develop more in order to meet those needs.
Mhm.
So
mhm,
you have to be a critical thinker, have to have an imagination, to see the unseen. Yes, have to have a global worldview. Have
mhm,
to be, yes, technologically savvy, or certainly one who partners with all of the new emergences of technology. Must be one who's not a misanthrope, but a lover of humanity, all of humanity. So therefore, you have to be exposed to the diverse ways in which divinity shows itself. These things
mhm,
going into the toolbox prior to launching out and serving in any context, but certainly a local faith community. Because I
mhm,
think more folks' hope and even idea of not just America, but idea of Christendom has been assassinated
Mm.
by it was that did that box, that failed to respond in times of crisis that individuals deemed was a crisis to them, whether it was to us or not.
Mhm.
Um, I believe in that toolbox, as you have been stressing, Brother Felton, is that uh, of the spirit of servanthood or a servant's heart. And serving is radical. If you look at first century ancient Palestine and Roman imperialism, and this one they deeming and suggesting is the king of the Jews, for he to come and end up washing folk feet, that was a very radical move in the act of service that was daring to suggest that other servants are to embody such humility as well, to demonstrate the work that you're seeking to
Yeah.
put into major practice. So I think all of those are a few tools, without a doubt, that I believe that need to be box in order close to being successful in the work that we've been called to carry out. And again, not entering any such space, confident in yourself, yeah, very sure in, again, your own personal constitution and moral convictions, faith convictions, but not knowing every way, because life will present itself in a manner, in a way that what we thought we knew was the most appropriate um, resource to respond to in such times as this is not. And I need to call on you, or I need to call on Lester, or call on Johnny and say, man, can you overnight me a tool to help me get from up out of this thing I'm in?
Yeah.
I forget what national product it was, but it was the tagline was "Life comes at you fast."
Oh yeah.
Oh, wow.
Um, I think when you talk about educational absolutism, or intellectual absolutism, I think that is one of the major insidious diseases that folk in the talented tenth, and leaders, and dare I say the young, the next group, are suffering from. So, anybody else wants to add to?
Well, I think Gray's given us a great tool set. So I want to just say ditto to all of that. I would add a
Mhm.
couple other things to the tool set, which probably are there anyhow. But I would delineate one is um, is aspire to greatness, and
Mhm.
and I don't mean it in a self-aggrandizing way, but Jesus said, "Whoever wants to be greatest among us must be servant of all." He didn't
Mm.
say it was a bad thing to aspire to greatness. It actually is a good thing. And Dr.
Mm.
King said everybody can be great because anyone can serve, right? And so I think we have to, Johnny Hill and I walked around on the Red Hills in Atlanta on a little campus there called Morehouse, and
Mhm.
there was an alum of that college by the name of Reverend Dr. Howard Thurman, who said
Mm.
over the heads of her students, Morehouse holds a crown that she challenges them to grow tall enough to wear.
Mhm.
I think that we've dumbed down leadership. We're not challenging people to grow up to wear the crown, right? There has to be an aspirational part of leadership that's never satisfied with the status quo, never satisfied with just having someone else's spot. Looking at someone and say, that looks like a good place to be. I want that pastorate. I want that job. I want to drive that
Mm.
car. I want to live in that house. No, no, no. You're setting your sights too short. You ought to aspire to greatness, and your
Mm.
greatness is not the same as someone else's greatness.
Don't look different. It
Yeah.
might.
Wow.
And then the second thing I would put in the tool set is adaptability. Uh,
Mm.
you got to be adaptive as a leader. There's a classic book. That book is at least 25 years old by Ron Heifetz called Leadership Without Easy Answers.
Mm.
And I wish he would come out with another COVID-19 edition, right? Because we're in a quandary. We're in a quagmire right
Mm.
now because
Mm.
of a lack of adaptive leadership. We got
Mhm.
180,000 people dead because we don't have an adaptive leader, right? This could have been
Mm.
stemmed a long time ago if we had the right kind of leadership.
That's right.
It's not, and Herman does a great job at health, and I'm glad that I've been a part of the institutes that they do to train the next generation of HBCU leaders. They do an
Mm.
exercise of hypotheticals, right? If this emergency, this crisis happens, what do you do? Man, that's the most invaluable exercise I've ever had. Is taking a crisis and learning how to move, flip on a dime, make the adjustments that you need to make in order to meet the crises head on. I
Mm.
think leaders have to have that in their toolbox. because most of what you encounter as a leader is not in anyone's textbook
Mm,
and it's
Hmm.
not in anyone's playbook.
yeah.
It's the stuff of life. And
That's
as you said,
right.
Herman, life comes at you fast.
I think that's
Hmm.
what Greg was just alluding to was, really having the self-awareness and the confidence to call when you need help as a leader.
Hmm. Hmm.
That oftentimes is something that I think that escapes
Hmm.
many of us. Hill, you have anything you want to add to that toolbox?
No, I just want to celebrate everything that's already been lifted up. I mean, I think the points that have just been made are absolutely critical. I don't really have much to add except just to reemphasize the importance of critical thinking, of reading and writing effectively. But that ability to adapt, as Dr. McCorn lifted up, is absolutely essential. And I'm thinking about, for instance, the way in which congregations across the country have had to like sort of pivot almost overnight. Now, we might think of it as a small thing, this notion of pastors having to go online and having to sort of do their sermons from Facebook or have websites and do online offerings and those sorts of things. But where it really impacts the community is their ability to deliver ministry, to do service, and
Mhm.
even advocacy as well. So it does have an impact on the larger socio-political, economic, and cultural framework of society. And so those churches that have been able to do that well can almost directly be linked to their theological education and the training and the formation of their leaders. I think you would agree with that, Dr. McCorn and Dr. Howard, that there's something about critical theological education and also that liberal arts formation that gives students the ability to navigate, to shift gears, to come up with the ideas necessary to confront these kinds of changes and crises. And we've seen it this past year like never before.
Yeah, I want to just add a couple of things that I've picked up, and I've been really trying to read everything that I can on on Proctor for the last year and a half and last year, and I don't know this to be true, but in as much as it is unequivocal that he was a brilliant man, um, very intelligent, I believe that his work ethic was second to none.
Impeccable.
And so when you talked about being a great writer and reading, I also think that being prepared, not the smartest
Mm-hmm.
person in the room, but the most prepared person in the room,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
really critical for people to lead. I
Wow.
I don't
Mm.
know everything about the academic enterprise, but I know enough where you
Mm.
can't pull the wool over my head, right? And
Mm-hmm.
when we train leaders, making sure that they understand how critical it is to be principled in
Mm.
your in your in your preparation. I think
Mm.
what COVID has done for us also is took away the boogeyman, right? As academicians and administrators, we know we have a cadre of folk who were not as inclined to go online, but now that boogeyman has been defeated. So it's a pleasure to go online, right? And but I also think that the blessing of COVID is that some ministers now have had to adapt, and what we've saw is that this amazing resilience that we have, which is we're no stranger to that at HBCUs, right? We were born out of necessity, under oppression, and we are still oppressed in many ways, however you look at it, and yet we rise. But I often tell those around me that I prefer to be optimistic as opposed to pessimistic. Yeah, I'm sitting in the middle of chaos, but something over there is beautiful. I'm gonna focus on that.
Mm.
That's taking my attention away from the chaos. But
Mm.
my point is that I think necessary as well is that preparation, and that is, as a Marine, why we were taught to have poise under fire, that grace under
Mm,
fire. It looks like you don't care. That's not what it is. I've been through so many scenarios in this stress test that we're through right now. I get it. I'm up here, but I'm calm about it, and that preparation allows me to be
mm.
that way. So I think that that's really necessary to add. I have one more question before we get into some light stuff, um, and that is, and that this is a presupposition that they haven't discovered or aren't committed to the Judeo-Christian principles. But these leaders, can we get them to commit to or rediscover the Judeo-Christian principles so that we can lead the masses? I think that those are the principles that are most sound, that allows for more buy-in collectively. Uh, is that a need? Do we need those? Are we more likely to find calm in the chaos, great leaders, et cetera, if folk are in line with the Judeo-Christian principles that many of us have learned and believe to be solid principles?
Absolutely. And I'll just admit that I mean, I really embrace Black liberation theology as a way of approaching the Judeo Christian heritage. And I think it's a gift. I mean, I think it's not just for Black people. That's one of the misconceptions about Black theology or Black liberation theology or a theology of liberation for the oppressed, is that it's just for Black folk.
But Dr.
But
You have to admit that it's wrong because it starts with black, right? That
right, right.
people from even seeing how beautiful Black liberation theology is, right? I think
Yeah,
it is, and I
yeah.
say that tongue in cheek.
Right, and I think that's the disturbing legacy of white supremacy and white nationalism, is that it assumes that blackness is isolated within the context of the African and African American experience and not part of the larger human experience. So the story of Black struggle and liberation is a human story of struggle and liberation. I'll give you a quick example. I have a student, she's a Japanese student who came to me. She actually had a PhD from NC State, but she wanted to learn her own story of how the Japanese experienced colonialism and how they faced down the demons of colonialism and the struggle to overcome that history and legacy. So, understanding for her the struggle of Black people in America helped give her insight and a deeper understanding of her own struggle and her own people's struggle to overcome the history of colonialism. And so, if we can help, I think, our own students and students from all walks of life to understand that Black life is a gift to humanity, that Black lives matter, but Black lives are also a gift to humanity in showing us how to confront the demons of hopelessness and despair, and how to embrace the power of prophetic imagination and peace and joy and possibility for the future as well.
Mm.
So, Herman, um, not to put words in your mouth,
Yes, sir.
but what I heard from your core just a moment ago, and that of you stating that I choose to be optimistic as opposed to pessimistic. And as a
Mm,
Marine, you're one that keeps calm, if you will, or tries to in the midst of chaos.
Mhm.
Is also that which is drawn from up out of your faith tradition and experience.
Yes, sir.
So when we talk
mm,
about the Judeo-Christian experience, I believe it still plays a major role, or certainly a paramount part of this puzzle in establishing leadership to lead these institutions that we're speaking of, because we find in the Judeo-Christian experience, um, by way of the likes and the works and the writings of Jerome, Clayton Ross, Lester, um, his thesis of the Old Testament Hebrews, which is that it's simply a story of a minority people struggling to survive.
Mhm.
and believing, to borrow the words of James Cone, God is on the side of the oppressed. So for me, for each of us who are members of this mystical body, um, who are those who practice the faith of the Judeo-Christian experience, who serve in leadership, we also serve, it seems, with this ingrained not only hope but truth that we are God's creation, and we are struggling now, but we are made also to survive, or we are minority people struggling to survive, and identifying the various movements of God, even in the midst of those seasons and periods of oppression,
Mhm.
or days in the wilderness. Um, if that can be captured apart from the faith vernacular and instilled in a leadership, then let's name it. Let's put it in a bottle. Let's put it in another book other than the book that we all share in faith. And I believe it will sell like hotcakes. But it is also who we be.
Yeah,
It is
just
who we be.
Yeah, we be.
yes.
That's so powerful. I'm going to ask you this question, Lester, before we move on. But I also want to share with you all, and I know some of you may know about this book, but I just came across it, um, and it is by Isabella Wilkerson. Cast the
Yeah.
origins of our discontent.
Yes, sir.
She has
Mm,
obliterated,
mm,
and at the same time helped me understand the difference between racism and casteism. And yes, sir. Yes, sir. Audiobook. And
mm,
it is
mm,
extraordinary. But I wanted to say that because when we talk about the radical nature of Black radicalism, um, people oftentimes want to think the worst of it, and as Johnny said, the beauty, the gift of it is something that I think is incalculable. I there's a book that helped me out in my professional career, that I think really moved me to the presidency, to be quite honest with you. And there's a brother by the name of Dwayne Josephs. He's with the Oakland Raiders. He is probably the most cool guy, um, phenomenal human being that I've met, and very spiritual. Played in the NFL and now director of player personnel. But his son was at Livingstone College, and we met through one of my frat brothers. And he told me about this book entitled "A Tale of Three Kings"
mm,
by Gene Edwards. And this book is it helped me understand the importance of managing up. And that's the question for you, Lester. How important is it for these young folks, the next wave, to understand not only about leadership and leading those who are following you, but how do you manage up? The Tale of Three Kings was about David in the middle of Saul and Absalom, I think it is, and how he had to understand the perfect synergy of worrying about appeasing a man who thought he wanted his job, and really nurturing, if you will, and sort of guiding a person who wanted his job and his boss's job. How important is it for people to understand that piece of managing up? Because I don't believe that anyone's really helping people understand that there will come a time where you need to understand how to manage up. You got
mm,
connections churches where you're not going to be the pastor. You have trustees where you have to manage your trustees, board of
mm,
directors, et cetera, et cetera. How important is it, and how do we get them to understand this notion of managing up?
mm,
That's a great question. So it goes back to the earlier point we talked about around accountability, and every leader, unless you're an autocrat or a dictator, everyone has to answer to someone, right? And the sooner you realize that, the better. you understand that you have a responsibility. It's what John Maxwell calls a 360-degree leader.
Mm.
Um, you got to lead above, you got to lead beside, you got to lead beneath. And I had when I was a pastor, these two brothers are still in the trenches in the pastorate. My hat is off to you. I did that for 31 years, but I had a maxim that I would always use is that I treat everybody the same, but I handle people differently.
Mm.
I treat everyone the same, but I handle people differently.
Mm.
I think leaders need to understand that.
Mhm.
In the Black church, we had this phrase coming up there: no big I's and no little U's, right?
Mm.
Everyone is equal. So as a leader, you're first among equals, but there is greater responsibility the higher up you go. To whom much is given, much is
Mm-hmm.
required. And I think it's the delicate dance and balance that we as leaders have to recognize, because all of us, whether you're the HNIC or not, you are accountable to a board of directors, right? Or a superior.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a dean, you got to answer to a president or a provost, right? As a president, I got to respond to my board, but I also, in another way, I got to answer to my students, right? I work for them too.
Mm-hmm.
Their parents and their financial aid pay for my salary,
Yeah.
right? So I'm accountable to them. I'm accountable to the communities that are looking for these young people
Mm.
to come back with something to say. You know,
Mm.
again, I'm sorry, y'all, forgive me. Johnny and I have to do a little bragging here, but you can always tell a Morehouse man, but you can't tell him much. When a Morehouse man leaves the comfortable confines of that campus, people, when they find out that you're a Morehouse man, they expect you to have something to say.
Mm-hmm.
They expect you to be able to lead. They expect you to have some kind of contribution to make because they know what Morehouse stands for.
Mm-hmm.
And in a real sense, I think that's what all of our HBCUs represent. When people know our brand and know our legacy, they expect something from us.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
I think, to your question, that leader has to understand all of those levels of responsibility and accountability. And if you can keep those in mind, it keeps you grounded, keeps you from getting what Big Mama used to call the big head.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I I don't know how and really don't want to end this conversation. I don't even know how to transition it off because I want to stay on, but I know you got a million different things to do. But I want to ask some just a couple of light questions to help me understand a little more about you and probably pick up some nuggets. Before I give you an opportunity to close with some parting thoughts. What is the favorite scripture? What is the favorite scripture? And I'm not talking about when you're sad or when you're oppressed or what is the favorite scripture of you, gentlemen? And I know it's hard to boil it down to one, right? Because I can go into Malachi, I can go into uh, Psalms is where I really like to be, but I can go in a couple of different places. But I'd like to just, learn a scripture or two that might move you, or one that you find yourself resting on.
It depends on
Well,
what day of the week you catch me.
Yeah.
Whatever day you want it to be, brother.
Well, this text has abided with me since my high school days. I wrote it in my high school yearbook, and I use it often for fall convocation when I speak to the students for the first time. This Philippians chapter 3. This one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind me,
Mm,
I reach forward to those things which are ahead of me. I press toward the prize of the high calling of God in Christ
oh
Jesus.
my.
That's my mantra.
Yeah.
you know,
I think mine would be John chapter 3, I think verse 2. It does not yet appear
mm,
what we shall be.
mm,
Already we are the sons and daughters of God, but it does not yet appear what we shall be.
Wow.
That is a good question because it depends, as Lester mentioned, the day and the time of the week, But I find myself in benediction oftentimes when the spirit of benediction, being reminded, be not conformed to this world
Mm.
or this present age, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern or prove that which is that good, acceptable, and perfect will of God. So it speaks to the fact of constantly aspiring and daring to see God differently.
Um, Favorite sermons. This could have come from a theologian that you really like. I'm a C.L. Franklin guy. I grew up listening to him with my mom, and I think one of his more notable was "The Devil Goes to Sunday School." But I'd like to know, as men of the cloth, what sermon sticks out to you? One that you may have preached yourself, or if there's a theologian that is that really resonates with you.
Look, I can say right now, there are plenty, but Gardner C. Taylor,
Am I?
um,
I'm not.
is there no
You had one of
balm
the
in
sermons
Gilead?
right there.
Yeah.
That's
Obama.
right. And
Mhm.
I've been inspired by him and give him much credit, obviously, for the inspiration to preach that text from the perspective of disease killer.
Mm,
He talks about the uniqueness of that balm not being a plaid native of ancient Palestine and had to be imported and brought in. He paints that picture, boy.
Yes, sir.
So Gardner C. Taylor, for
right.
sure.
That's what the good ones do, right? They put you in the
Yeah.
place from which they are speaking from, and take you on this mental voyage. I think. Uh, McCorn.
Yeah, man, you call Gardner Taylor, man. There's so many Gardner sermons I love. He's definitely one of my favorite preachers. I
Yeah.
want to go back to a preacher by the name of Caesar Clark.
Mm,
Caesar Clark
Oh
preached
yeah.
a sermon when I was a student at Morehouse. He used to run revival at Antioch North Baptist.
Yeah.
Cameron Alexander every year he ran
Oh
revival,
yeah.
and that was my introduction to him as a young student. And he preached a
Mm.
sermon I shall never forget called "Limping Toward the Sunrise."
Mm.
It's the story of Jacob wrestling with an angel,
mm.
and how he had to live with a limp the rest of his life. And he said, we're all limping toward the sunrise.
Wow.
Mm. Wow. Wow. I think a sermon that really changed my life was a sermon I heard when I was a student at Morehouse, and it was by Martin Luther King, The Drum Major Instinct. That sermon probably changed my life.
Mm.
If you want to say that I'm a drum major, then say that I'm a drum major for justice.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Um, this has
that's the sermon they played at his funeral too, right?
That's
Yeah.
right. That's it. Mhm.
this I want to thank you, gentlemen. This has been refreshing for me and highly informative. We've talked about how we create the next wave, and
Mm.
just pontificate. We talked about some things that are needed, some tools that are needed, some dispositions that are necessary. Great scholars that you've all quoted and referenced to help us. Indeed, we are in some trying times right now, and it is without question. We have devolved as a nation, but Isabel Wilkerson really said in so many places, but we really haven't.
Mm.
This is who we are. When people talk about we are better than this, actually, we probably aren't if we are going to be contextually honest. Um,
Mm.
and I go back to a sermon that Bishop Kenneth Monroe preached at a baccalaureate service, one of the senior bishops in the AME Zion Church. And he talked about, the title of his sermon was "The Only Thing That Matters Now Is What Happens Next." And obviously he was talking about the sisters who had a brother who died, and Jesus said, "Where is he?"
Mm.
You know the story. If you'd have been there, he
Wow.
would have died. And Monroe really talked about the only thing that matters is what happens next. Now, I'm not supposing that we forget everything that happened. What I am, and what I want you to reflect on, is what happens next.
Mm.
Where are we where are we going with all that we're facing now? How do we move there as Christian leaders? How do we move there as laypersons? I'd like for you to take a couple of minutes to really just leave us with a word about what we should be cloaked in and where our eyes should be focused on going.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go and take a swing and get out of the way so that Lester and Johnny can come and clear the bases. I want to say thank you.
That's a setup. That's a
Look,
setup.
here comes now.
Right.
Here comes the look. Here comes the close. Right. I want to say, look, brother, Felton, for this opportunity. But in all seriousness, Lester mentioned earlier adaptability as being a tool that is necessary as we move forward, as well as leaders in this present age. We need that gift and that tool of adaptability, because I can speak for myself. My entire life has been one that I dare say, and I cannot remove or separate myself from my faith experience. Just like, as Lester alluded to earlier as well, what is unique about Judaism or a Jew is that you're born a Jew and you practice Judaism. So, so in the same manner as it is with African traditional religions and the religion of our ancestors, and that which is still deep within our own bones as Judeo-Christian practicing believers here on this shore, there's a very thin line, if a line at all, not only between one's faith and family ties, but also between one's um, faith experience or witness and one's day-to-day life.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that I've been favored by God, to find myself in places that I never aspired even to be, yet called upon due to what I have learned is a response of perceived faithfulness in my service rendered prior to the elevation. So I believe that we are to continue to do what we've been considering all day: serve fully. I'm speaking serving our God and trust unto us. And then the day shall come. Here comes the preacher and me that makes reference to Jesus, and the text says that, and fix, as the days drew near for him to be taken up, he's fastly set it, and James and John ahead of him to prepare the way. And of course, there was rejection when they came into a particular Samaritan village because his face was set towards Jerusalem. And James and John wanted or asked of the Lord, would you have us to call fire down from heaven and consume them as Elijah did? But Jesus rebukes them and said, oh, no, I didn't come to destroy life, but to save life. And he just simply went on to the next village. That is why being faithful with each step that God places before us, and knowing that your life and your ministry or your service, when done in when we're faithful with that charge, is in itself transformative. It will challenge our own communities to do better or think of a new way. And along the way, for every door shut, God will open a new one when you're faithful as a servant. So I'm just going to keep serving as long as I have breath to serve, do my best to try to uplift. And I would encourage anyone to uplift um, the moral consciousness of who we are as Black church, deliberating work that we do. And as a person of faith, believing that, God got us and God is going to work
Mhm.
things out.
Sir. Brother Hill.
Absolutely. And first, I just want to say I'm so grateful for this body right here. I mean, President Felton, Dr. McCorn, thank you so much for your leadership. I'm such a big fan of your work, and I believe that what we're doing in this space is absolutely critical to what's next, and that is forming leaders who are training leaders. So, for instance, I think it's so important that we organize at this time. You mentioned that you were a veteran. You were in the military. I served 4.5 years in the Army as well before I went to college. One of the things that you learn is how important it is to develop leaders.
Mhm.
And it's great that we have shining leaders today like Reverend William Barber and people like Jamal Bryant down in Atlanta and others. But if we are not about the business of forming leaders who are
Mhm.
going to go out and train other leaders, then we're thinking short-sighted. We have to look at the longer, broader, bigger picture, and it's rooted in scripture through shaping disciples, through forming disciples. Go ye therefore and make disciples. So I think it's important that we continue the work of the Higher Education Leadership Foundation and continue to expand its work globally to form leaders who are going to train other leaders for future generations.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Um, I thought about last night while I watched the Black Panther again
Mm.
Mm,
and listened to the tributes given to Chadwick Boseman.
yeah.
And, for preachers, this happens to us every time we go um, preach a funeral, give the eulogy at a funeral, attend a funeral. You invariably and inevitably begin to take inventory of your own life.
Mm.
And you begin
Every
to
time.
ask the question, what will people say of me when they stand over my body?
Yes, sir.
Mm,
And Chadwick Boseman, my God, what he did in 43 short years
Mm.
and the impact that he made, the way you saw how people were moved by his death. It wasn't about a movie, it was about a man. A man who embodied the best of every one of the movies. He threw himself into it, and it wasn't hard because it was who he was. And I think we've got to teach those lessons to the young people who want the glory, the glitz, and the glamour of leadership. That disease has infected the church. It's sad to say, but I mean, we've become, a place of entertainment and status, and that's not what Jesus died for.
Mm.
And so I tell my students every year, I teach them this little poem that how I learned the difference between the comparative and the superlative forms of the word good.
mm,
Good, better, best. Never let it rest until your good is better and your better is best. We have to strive to do and give and live our very best because the old folk are right. Tomorrow is not promised to you.
mm,
Um, man, Dean Hill, Dean Howard, and President McCoy. It has truly been an honor and a privilege. And I take from this conversation and this sharing, really profound words that have invigorated me for a couple of different things. And I know that there will be others who view this conversation that will leave with them. Chief among them is the synergy that you all have without having conversation with each other about what a leader should look like. And there
mm,
intrinsic threads, strong, powerful, unbreakable threads between your offerings.
Mm,
And I find that to be confirmation that we are blessed to have had this conversation with you all, you scholars, you men of the cloth, and you great Black leaders. I'm grateful, and on behalf of the foundation, want to thank you again for being with us. If COVID has done nothing more for you, I pray that reconciliation of oneself has occurred. And Howard alluded to this earlier about being taught about his self
mm,
in this pandemic,
Mhm.
and that
mm,
I'm not gathering what he meant by that. It struck a chord with me because I've said to all of my friends, if you don't leave this time and come out of this space a different person, a better you, then you have died in COVID.
Mm.
mm.
Mhm.
God bless.
I think
That's
that's
right.
a wrong word to say, but I
No, that's truth.
critical that we examine ourselves,
Mm,
especially as leaders
Mhm.
in this time. And Hill, you talk so much about preparing that next wave, and I pray that
mm-hmm,
those under your voices, all of you, uh,
mm,
to see what it means to be selfless and unafraid of the next wave.
Mhm.
mm,
I think that's what our leaders lack in many cases. We're afraid
mm,
to empower those behind us. So thank you
mm-hmm.
for the many lessons that you've shared with us today. And when God says that we can go back out and go back outside and play, I look forward to breaking bread with you three.
Likewise. Likewise.
Absolutely.
I want to ride that motorcycle, Felton. That's what I'm
Yes,
waiting.
sir.
Come on and ride. I tell you, her name is Mother Harriet.
Mother Harriet. Yes,
Mm,
she's leading us to
The
freedom.
ride to freedom.
Yes, sir.
absolutely.
Yes,
Where you
sir.
want to go, even if you don't know where you want to go. And so you're welcome to hop on that Harley, my brother.
Yes, sir.
Uh, but you
Look,
brothers,
look,
yes, sir. I thought you have something you want to add, Howard?
I'm, it's interesting you said no, no. I'm just because I was having a conversation with my wife last night. I said, you know what? I might go ahead and get myself.
Do it, brother. Do it. It's, it is wind therapy, and I've
Yeah.
started, you know, being a veteran, riding in the Rolling Thunder and escorting veterans to their final resting place was the single
Wow.
purpose for me getting a Harley. But the wind therapy, there's just
Mm,
absolutely nothing like it. And yes, it is dangerous, but I have my shield and Jesus with me while I'm riding, and
mm,
I believe people say when you're walking, you see things that you don't see when you're driving, but when you are riding a Harley, you get a chance to
mm.
see God's creation in a different way. So I'm gonna be on you, Howard. I'm gonna
All
send you
right.
pictures and all all
Yeah. Go ahead.
kinds to push you in that space, man. But I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of the other founders for being here today. And I look forward to chopping it up with each of you when again we're all able to go back outside and play.
Yes, sir.
Likewise.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
President.
Peace
Thank
and
you, brothers.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you
you.
all.
Thank you, brothers.
care.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you.